In Miami's most prestigious fight gym, a historic clash between speed and timing was about to unfold, and in just a few movements, it would become clear how fractions of a second can leave years behind. The Thunderdome Gym in Miami's South Beach district was a cathedral of combat sports, where the world's most elite fighters came to hone their skills under the relentless Florida sun. The 12,000-square-foot facility boasted professional-grade rings, heavy bags from Thailand, speed bags that sang under rapid-fire punches, and walls lined with championship belts from every major fighting organization on the planet. Hassan Lightning Al-Rashid owned this temple of speed. At 26 years old, he stood 5 feet 11 inches with the lean, explosive musculature of a big cat. Every fiber of his 180-pound frame had been sculpted for one purpose: to move faster than humanly possible. His Middle Eastern heritage showed in his sharp features, dark hair, and intense brown eyes that seemed to track movement at superhuman speeds. Hassan was widely regarded as the fastest striker in kickboxing history. His signature technique, a blindingly quick combination of left hook, right cross, and spinning heel kick, had been measured at completion times that sports scientists initially refused to believe. Video analysis showed Hassan could throw 14 distinct techniques in the span of 3.2 seconds, each one delivered with championship-level power and precision. Speed kills, Hassan would tell his students, his accent carrying traces of his Lebanese heritage mixed with Miami flair. In fighting, in business, in life, the fastest predator always wins. Everything else is just philosophy for the slow. This philosophy had served Hassan extraordinarily well. He held championship titles in 3 different kickboxing organizations, owned a string of successful gyms across Florida, and commanded appearance fees that rivaled those of professional boxers. His Instagram account, followed by 2.8 million people, was a showcase of impossible athletic feats. Hassan throwing combinations so fast they blurred on camera, demolishing heavy bags with machine gun-like precision, and sparring sessions where his opponents seemed to move in slow motion by comparison. But Hassan's greatest source of pride wasn't his championships or his social media following. It was his complete domination over time itself. While other fighters had to think about their techniques, Hassan operated on pure instinct, his nervous system firing at speeds that allowed him to see openings and exploit them before his opponents even realized they existed. That Tuesday afternoon, Hassan was preparing for his upcoming title defense against Brazilian champion Eduardo El Toro Santos, a powerful but notoriously slow striker who relied on timing and ring IQ rather than pure speed. Hassan viewed the fight as little more than a formality, another opportunity to demonstrate that modern athleticism had evolved beyond the limitations that had constrained previous generations of fighters. Eduardo's old school, Hassan explained to his training partner, Miguel Reyes, as they went through their final preparation session. Good technique, smart fighter, but he's 34 years old. His reflexes are already deteriorating. I'll be hitting him 3 times before he can even begin to respond. Miguel, a veteran trainer who had worked with fighters across multiple generations, nodded but seemed less confident than his star pupil. Eduardo's tricky, Hassan. He doesn't rely just on speed. His timing is exceptional. He makes fighters beat themselves. Hassan laughed as he unleashed a lightning-fast combination on the heavy bag, the leather exploding under his strikes with sharp, rhythmic pops. Timing is just what slow fighters use to excuse their limitations, Miguel. When you can move like I move, timing becomes irrelevant. You create your own openings through pure speed. As Hassan finished his workout, glistening with sweat and breathing easily despite the intense session, he noticed a small group entering the gym through the main entrance. Among them was an older man whose presence immediately drew Hassan's attention, not because he recognized him, but because everything about the man's movement suggested a lifetime of martial arts training. Chuck Norris, at 73 years old, moved through the gym with the measured grace of someone who had spent 5 decades perfecting the mechanics of combat. He was visiting Miami as part of a documentary project about the evolution of martial arts in America, and the producers had wanted to film some segments at one of the city's most prestigious training facilities. Accompanying Chuck were documentary director Sarah Chun, a young filmmaker who specialized in sports content, and Dr. James Rodriguez, a sports scientist who was contributing expert analysis to the project. They had come to Thunderdome specifically because of its reputation for housing some of the world's most technically advanced fighters. This place has an incredible reputation, Sarah said as she surveyed the impressive facility, cameras already capturing the environment. Hassan Al-Rashid is considered one of the most dominant strikers in combat sports history. Chuck nodded appreciatively, watching Hassan complete his training session with obvious respect for the young man's skill level. His technique is remarkable. That kind of speed requires tremendous dedication and natural talent. Dr. Rodriguez, checking some notes on his tablet, added context for the documentary. Hassan's strike velocity measurements are literally off the charts. We're talking about hand speeds that approach the limits of human neural processing. Hassan, noticing the cameras and recognizing an opportunity to showcase his abilities to a broader audience, approached the group with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being the most impressive person in any room. "Welcome to Thunder Dome," Hassan said, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a champion. "Hassan Al-Rashid, you're here filming something about martial arts." Sarah stepped forward to make introductions. "We're working on a documentary about the evolution of combat sports. This is Chuck Norris. I'm sure you know his work." Hassan's eyes settled on Chuck with the polite but dismissive attention he typically gave to people outside the contemporary fighting world. Here was someone who had clearly been important in martial arts history, but who belonged to an era that Hassan considered fundamentally obsolete. "Chuck Norris," Hassan said, extending his hand with theatrical respect. "Absolute legend, man. My father used to watch your movies when I was growing up. Classic action cinema." Chuck shook Hassan's hand with genuine warmth. "Thank you. I understand you're quite accomplished in competitive fighting." "Three-time world champion across multiple organizations," Hassan replied with pride. "Currently holds several speed records that most people said were physically impossible. I've basically redefined what human striking capability looks like in the modern era." "That's genuinely impressive," Chuck said. "Speed has always been one of the most important attributes in martial arts." Hassan's eyes lit up as the conversation moved toward his favorite topic, the supremacy of speed in combat sports. "Exactly. And that's what separates modern fighters from previous generations. We understand now that speed is everything. When you can strike faster than your opponent can think, technique becomes secondary." Sarah sensed an interesting dynamic developing and signaled her cameraman to begin recording. This generational contrast could provide compelling content for their documentary. "What about other factors?" Chuck asked with genuine curiosity. "Timing, distance, reading your opponent's intentions?" Hassan waved his hand dismissively. "Those things matter when fighters are relatively equal in speed. But when you have a significant speed advantage, like what modern training methods can develop, everything else becomes academic. I can throw 5 techniques in the time it takes most fighters to throw one." Chuck listened thoughtfully, his expression remaining neutral but his eyes showing the kind of deep consideration that Hassan completely missed. "So you believe speed is the primary determinant of fighting effectiveness?" "Without question," Hassan replied confidently. "Look, I respect what fighters accomplished in your era, Mr. Norris, but let's be realistic about the evolution that's taken place. Modern fighters train with sports science, video analysis, reaction time optimization. We're operating at levels that previous generations couldn't even conceptualize." Dr. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, but Chuck seemed perfectly calm, even curious about Hassan's perspective. "That's an interesting viewpoint," Chuck said. "What would you think about demonstrating some of these principles? Perhaps we could explore different approaches to the same fundamental concepts." Hassan's competitive instincts immediately activated. This was perfect content, him showcasing cutting-edge fighting techniques to a documentary crew, with a martial arts legend as context for how far the sport had evolved. "I'd be honored," Hassan said, though his tone suggested he expected to be providing the education. "What did you have in mind? I could show you some advanced combinations, maybe demonstrate the kind of speed that's possible with modern training methods." "Actually," Chuck said with patient consideration, "I was thinking we might explore the relationship between speed and timing. You demonstrate your approach, and perhaps I could share some traditional concepts about combat rhythm." Hassan grinned with barely concealed condescension. This would be perfect, a direct comparison between modern athletic science and outdated traditional methods. His social media followers would love this kind of generational contrast. "That sounds educational," Hassan agreed, "like a comparison between evolution and historical techniques. Good for the documentary." Chuck nodded. "What would you suggest as a meaningful demonstration?" Hassan didn't hesitate. "Reaction time challenges. Set up some basic attack scenarios, measure response speeds, see how quickly we can identify and counter common striking patterns. It's the foundation of everything else in fighting. Excellent choice, Chuck agreed. Speed and reaction time are indeed fundamental. Miguel began setting up some basic training equipment, focus mitts, reaction balls, and a digital timer that could measure response times down to hundredths of a second. Hassan went through his pre-demonstration routine, loosening up with the kind of dynamic warm-up exercises that sports scientists had developed to optimize neural firing patterns. Chuck stood quietly to the side, doing simple stretching movements that looked more like gentle yoga than fight preparation. To Hassan, the contrast was perfect, cutting-edge athletic preparation versus outdated traditional methods. "Whenever you're ready," Hassan announced, positioning himself in front of the reaction equipment. "I'll show you what modern reflexes look like." The demonstration began with Hassan showcasing his signature ability. Miguel would hold up focus mitts in unpredictable patterns, and Hassan would strike them with combinations so fast they created a continuous sound rather than distinct impacts. His hand speed was genuinely impressive, a blur of perfectly timed strikes that hit their targets with robotic precision. "Incredible," Sarah murmured to her cameraman. "Are you getting this in slow motion?" For 3 minutes, Hassan put on a display that would have impressed any combat sports professional. His reactions to visual cues were instantaneous, his combinations flowed together without pause, and his accuracy remained perfect despite the blazing speed of his movement. When Hassan finished, he was breathing slightly harder but looked pleased with his performance. "Modern reaction training," he explained to the cameras. "Neural pathway optimization combined with explosive muscle fiber development. This is what human speed looks like when you remove the limitations that constrained previous generations." Chuck had watched the entire demonstration with obvious appreciation for Hassan's abilities. "That was remarkable," he said genuinely. "May I try something?" "Of course," Hassan replied, curious to see what a 73-year-old could demonstrate after such a display of modern athletic prowess. Chuck positioned himself in front of the same equipment, but instead of adopting an athletic stance, he simply stood naturally, his posture relaxed but alert. Miguel looked uncertain about how to adjust the challenge for someone of Chuck's age, but Chuck nodded for him to proceed with the same pattern he'd used for Hassan. What happened next defied Hassan's understanding of how speed and timing worked. Chuck's responses weren't faster than Hassan's in terms of pure velocity. If anything, his movements appeared more deliberate, more controlled. But somehow, he was intercepting Miguel's focus mitt movements before Hassan could even see the openings. It was as if Chuck was responding to attacks that hadn't been launched yet. "How is he doing that?" Dr. Rodriguez whispered to Sarah, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was observing. Chuck wasn't just matching Hassan's reaction times. He was consistently beating them while appearing to move at a fraction of the speed. His strikes arrived at precisely the right moment, not through rapid-fire movement, but through what looked like perfect prediction of timing and distance. After 2 minutes of this impossible demonstration, Hassan couldn't contain his confusion any longer. "Wait, stop," he said, his competitive confidence beginning to crack. "How are you reacting that fast? You're not even moving that quickly." Chuck smiled slightly, the first hint of anything other than respectful attention he'd shown all afternoon. "I'm not reacting to what your partner is doing. I'm reading what he's about to do." "That's impossible," Hassan insisted. "You can't predict random movements." "They're not random," Chuck explained patiently. "Miguel telegraphs every movement through micro-expressions, weight shifts, breathing patterns. When you learn to read those signs, you don't need to react quickly. You can move in anticipation." Hassan stared at Chuck as if he were speaking a foreign language. Everything Hassan had built his fighting philosophy around, speed, reflexes, rapid response, was being challenged by someone who seemed to operate on an entirely different level of awareness. "But that's not how fighting works," Hassan protested. "It's about who can move faster, who can get there first." Chuck shook his head gently. "Speed without timing is just movement. Timing without understanding is just luck. Real effectiveness comes from reading your opponent so completely that you know what they're going to do before they do." Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his role as a passive observer. "Could you explain the mechanics of what you're doing? From a neurological standpoint, anticipatory responses shouldn't be that accurate." Chuck considered the question thoughtfully. "It's not magic or supernatural ability. This pattern recognition developed through decades of focus practice. When you train yourself to observe rather than just react, you begin to see that most fighting behavior is highly predictable. Hassan felt his worldview beginning to shift uncomfortably. Everything he'd believed about speed and dominance was being challenged by someone who seemed to understand combat on a level Hassan had never even considered. Could you teach me? Hassan asked, his voice lacking its usual commanding confidence. Chuck studied the young fighter thoughtfully. Learning to see requires changing how you think about fighting entirely. Are you prepared to question everything you believe about speed and effectiveness? Hassan looked around the gym, his domain, the place where he was supposed to be the undisputed master of all things related to striking speed. Suddenly, all his records and championships seemed less impressive than they had an hour earlier. Yes, Hassan said simply. I want to understand what you just showed me. Over the following months, Hassan's entire approach to fighting underwent a fundamental transformation. Under Chuck's guidance, he learned to slow down his training, to focus on reading opponents rather than simply overwhelming them with speed. He discovered that true timing wasn't about moving faster, it was about moving at precisely the right moment. His fighting style evolved from pure aggression to strategic precision. He still possessed all his physical speed, but now he used it selectively, choosing moments when velocity would be most effective rather than simply trying to outquick everyone he faced. The documentary featuring their encounter became one of the most watched martial arts films of the year, not because of its spectacle, but because it captured something profound about the difference between athletic ability and martial wisdom. In his title defense against Eduardo Santos 6 months later, Hassan fought differently than anyone had ever seen him fight. Instead of trying to overwhelm his opponent with rapid-fire combinations, he moved with calculated patience, reading Eduardo's patterns and responding with devastating precision at exactly the right moments. He won by knockout in the 4th round, but the victory felt different from all his previous fights. It wasn't just a demonstration of superior speed, it was an expression of deeper understanding. I used to think fighting was about being faster than everyone else, Hassan told reporters after the fight. Chuck Norris taught me that it's about being smarter than everyone else. Speed is a tool. Timing is an art, and art lasts longer than athletics. The lesson extended far beyond combat sports. Hassan began applying the same principles to his business ventures, his personal relationships, and his approach to training other fighters. He learned that sustainable success came not from overwhelming others with intensity, but from understanding situations so deeply that the right response became obvious. Years later, when Hassan had become one of the most respected trainers in combat sports, he would tell his students about the day he learned that timing is everything. I thought I was the fastest fighter in the world, he would say. Instead, I discovered I was just the most impatient. Real speed isn't about how quickly you move, it's about moving at exactly the right moment. And sometimes, the most profound victories come not from defeating opponents, but from discovering that what you thought was your greatest strength was actually a limitation waiting to be transcended.